The porcelain teacup slipped from my son's grasp, shattering across the lawyer's polished oak floor as he heard the 4 words that would dismantle his world. Did you read Article 9? But let me start from the beginning. My name is Grace Preston. For 38 years, I was the loyal wife to Richard Preston, a shipping magnate worth nearly $55 million. While he constructed his global enterprise, I nurtured our only child, orchestrated his social engagements, and smiled politely at gatherings where attendees celebrated my husband's commercial brilliance. What they never realized was that behind each successful man stands a woman who studies every detail. The memorial service was precisely what Richard would have demanded. Sophisticated, costly, and filled with individuals who were indebted to him. My son, Michael, performed the mourning successor flawlessly, accepting sympathies while mentally spending his legacy. I observed it in his gaze, the manner they brightened when former colleagues referenced the corporation's valuation, the real estate holdings, the investment accounts. After the final guest departed, and we returned to the mansion Richard had designed for us in upstate New York, Michael showed no interest in emotional reflection. I remained in my dark memorial dress, still wearing Richard's preferred cologne for comfort, when he trapped me in the sunroom with his wife Samantha observing from behind him like a hawk in luxury attire. "Mother, we must address logistical concerns," he stated, adjusting his collar with the restlessness of someone who had anticipated this occasion longer than he would confess. "Father has passed, and that alters all circumstances." I prepared some tea with unsteady hands. "What precisely are you suggesting, Michael?" "I'm stating you cannot remain here. This residence is excessively large, too costly to upkeep. You're 72 years old and honestly, you'll require assistance shortly." Samantha nodded wisely behind him, as though she had rehearsed this dialogue. "We've researched Golden Meadows, that beautiful facility approximately 90 minutes away, quite exclusive, numerous engagements for individuals your age." The effortless brutality struck me like a physical impact. 4 hours after laying my husband to rest, my son was exiling me to perish among unfamiliar faces. "Michael, this is my residence. I've resided here for 28 years. He shrugged, already advancing toward the exit. "Not any longer. Based on Father's testament, I receive all assets. The company, the properties, everything. I'm being charitable by permitting you to remain until we coordinate your relocation." He stopped at the doorway, and that's when he uttered the sentence that transformed our relationship permanently. "Collect your possessions, elderly woman. You're transferring to assisted living." The following morning, I contacted Benjamin Cross. Benjamin had served as Richard's legal counsel since before Michael's birth. But beyond that, he had been Richard's confidant. When I reached him the morning after Michael's impressive display, there was something in Benjamin's tone that made me question if he had anticipated my communication. "Grace, my dear, how are you managing?" His voice was comforting, but I sensed a hint of something additional. Expectation, perhaps. "I've experienced better moments, Benjamin. Michael appears to believe I'm destined for assisted living next week. Something about receiving all assets." There was an extended silence on the telephone. "Grace, when was the most recent occasion you actually examined Richard's testament?" The inquiry surprised me. "Well, Richard always managed our legal matters. I signed whatever he instructed me to sign. Trusted whatever he assured me to trust." "Why?" "Because I believe it's time you visited my office. Are you available this afternoon?" Benjamin's workplace remained unchanged for 15 years. All rich wood and legal volumes that likely exceeded most people's vehicle values. But Benjamin personally seemed more aged, more fragile, like he was bearing a confidential matter that had been burdening him for too long. "Grace, I must inquire about something, and I need you to be entirely truthful with me." He positioned himself behind his enormous desk. Richard's testament unfolded before him like a strategic map. "Did Richard ever reference a man named Daniel Westwood to you?" The name impacted me like a bodily strike. Daniel Westwood. Richard's financial controller for 12 years. The individual with the impeccable credentials and the method of observing my husband that caused discomfort. The one who had abruptly left the organization 3 years prior. Approximately when Richard began working additional hours more frequently. "He was his accountant," I responded cautiously. "Why?" Benjamin's expression became severe. "Because 4 years ago, Richard visited me in a condition I had never witnessed previously. He was alarmed. Grace, truly frightened. Daniel Westwood was threatening to disclose knowledge that would have ruined him. The tea I had been drinking turned acidic in my mouth. What manner of knowledge? The variety that could have sent him to federal prison for securities fraud and embezzlement. He possessed records, Grace. Evidence that Richard had been diverting funds from his corporation, concealing resources, avoiding taxes on an enormous scale. He demanded $6 million to remain silent. I placed my cup down with shaking hands. My husband, the individual I had trusted with each facet of our existence, had been a lawbreaker. What action did he take? He compensated him. But beyond that, he recognized he needed to shield you from the consequences if his illegal activities ever became exposed. That's when he requested I prepare a particularly unique amendment to his testament. Benjamin leaned closer, his eyes focused. Article 9, Grace. Did Michael reference Article 9? My heart was accelerating now. He stated he inherited all assets. That's what he was intended to believe. Richard was extremely explicit about that. Benjamin rotated the testament so I could view it, indicating a segment I had never observed before. Article 9 specifies that if Richard dies under questionable conditions, or if his commercial methods are ever investigated by federal agencies, his complete estate transfers to his spouse with his son obtaining precisely $1. I gazed at the document, the phrases blurring before my vision, but Richard died from an aneurysm. There was nothing questionable about it. Benjamin's smile was sharp as a surgical instrument. Grace, what knowledge do you possess regarding Daniel Westwood's present situation? Nothing. He vanished 3 years ago. He didn't vanish. He's been in federal detention assisting with a probe into investment scams involving multiple prominent New York businessmen. Richard's name leads that register. He slid another paper across the desk. This arrived this morning. The SEC wishes to interview you regarding your husband's commercial methods. The room began rotating. Benjamin, what are you informing me? I'm telling you that in approximately 1 week, the federal administration will freeze all of Richard's resources as portion of their examination. Article 9 will automatically activate, and you, my dear Grace, will become the exclusive heir to $55 million. He paused, allowing that to absorb. Michael has no knowledge of this yet. I reflected on my son's arrogant face, his casual harshness, his presumption that I was merely a load to be eliminated. Then I considered Golden Meadows, about spending my final years playing card games with strangers while Michael spent my husband's wealth on his wife's luxury vehicle collection. When does this occur? I inquired. The SEC examination is planned for next Thursday. Michael will receive the notification about Article 9 that same morning. Benjamin reclined in his chair. And for the initial instance since Richard's memorial, I observed him smile. I recommend you spend the week preparing, though not for Golden Meadows. The week passed in an unusual suspended actuality. Michael and Samantha visited Saturday morning to debate my relocation schedule, as they labeled it, their voices overflowing with artificial worry while they assessed chambers for their upcoming renovations. I provided them tea and smiled, performing the bewildered, thankful mother while my heart pounded with confidential understanding. We've communicated with Golden Meadows, Samantha declared, extracting a folder filled with pamphlets. They have a vacancy next week. It's truly quite beautiful, Mother Preston. You'll possess your private room, daily meals, and ample activities. I nodded along, posing suitable inquiries about visitation periods and cleaning services, while Michael explored through the residence like he was already refurbishing. He halted at Richard's office, his eyes focusing on the oak desk where his father had established an empire and concealed his illegal acts. I'll need to examine Father's documents, he stated, more to himself than to me. Organize the commercial particulars, transfer everything appropriately. Naturally, dear, I replied, not mentioning that Benjamin had already coordinated for all of Richard's significant papers to be protected in a security container that only I could reach. Take your time. Sunday night, I contacted my sister Clara in Arizona. We hadn't conversed much since Richard's memorial, but Clara had consistently been the sensible one in our family. Clara, it's Grace. I need to ask you something, and I need you to refrain from questions. That appears foreboding. What's occurring? If I were to arrive at your residence next week with several bags, and a narrative that would astonish you, would you have space for me? There was a pause, then Clara's laughter, warm and recognizable. Grace Eleanor Preston, are you ultimately developing fortitude? Because it's beyond time. Monday morning, I accomplished something I hadn't done in 28 years. I went purchasing for myself, not for charity occasion outfits or memorial clothing, but for the type of wardrobe a woman with $55 million might desire. I commenced at luxury boutiques, progressing through stores I had forgotten existed, acquiring garments that made me feel influential rather than unnoticeable. The sales consultant at the final shop, a youthful woman named Jessica with compassionate eyes, assisted me in selecting a charcoal gray outfit that fitted like it was tailored. Special event, she inquired as I admired myself in the fitting room mirror. You could state that. I'm going to have a highly significant discussion with my son. Well, you appear like a woman who implies commerce. That's precisely what I intended. Monday evening, I packed my genuine possessions, the items that were important to me. Picture collections, my grandmother's jewelry, the few pieces of Richard's that maintained emotional rather than financial worth. I left visible 2 suitcases of outdated garments, the type of items a defeated woman might bring to assisted living. Tuesday morning arrived overcast and damp, appropriate climate for what was about to transpire. Michael telephoned at 9:15, his voice tense with barely controlled enthusiasm. Mother, I require you to meet me at Benjamin's office at 2:30. There are some papers we need to examine jointly. Papers? Simply estate matters, technical specifics. Don't concern yourself. But I was concerned, though not about what Michael believed. I was concerned about whether I would possess the strength to witness my son's world collapse without experiencing remorse. Because despite everything, despite his cruelty and avarice, he remained my child. At precisely midday, my doorbell sounded. Through the glass, I could observe 3 dark sedans parked in my driveway and individuals in SEC jackets advancing toward my main entrance. I inhaled deeply, straightened my new charcoal outfit, and proceeded to address the door. Mrs. Preston, Agent Mark Reynolds, SEC. We possess authorization to examine these premises regarding a continuous investigation into your deceased husband's commercial methods. I moved aside to admit them, my voice stable and cooperative. Certainly, Agent Reynolds. I'm afraid I don't possess much knowledge about my husband's enterprise, but I'm pleased to assist however possible. As federal representatives moved through my residence, photographing Richard's office and packaging his files, I sat calmly in the sitting area and anticipated my telephone to ring. At 1:52 p.m., it did. Mother. Michael's voice was elevated than normal, strained. Mother, something has occurred. The SEC, they're at Father's headquarters, and Benjamin states, he states. There's something in the testament we need to debate instantly. I'll be there shortly, dear. As I drove to Benjamin's office, passing the SEC vehicle still stationed in my driveway, I reflected on the expression on Michael's face, when he had instructed me to collect my possessions, the dismissive gesture of his hand when he had labeled me an elderly woman, the total absence of affection or respect in his eyes when he had planned to exile me to perish among strangers. Some instructions I contemplated merit $55 million. Benjamin's conference space had never felt so confined. Michael sat across from me, his face the shade of ancient paper, while Samantha sat beside him, appearing like she might genuinely collapse. The SEC documents were distributed across the oak table like proof at a criminal case, which I assumed they basically were. This is inconceivable, Michael kept repeating, his voice rising with each repetition. Father was a legitimate businessman. He constructed that corporation from nothing. Benjamin modified his spectacles with the tolerance of a man who had been managing difficult clients for 35 years. Michael, your father was certainly an exceptional businessman. Regrettably, he was also a securities violator on an enormous scale. The SEC has documentation extending back 18 years. I maintained what I hoped was a suitably surprised expression while internally, I was calculating Richard's illegal acts clarified so much, the unexpected business journeys, the late nights at the headquarters, the manner he had insisted on handling all our finances personally. He hadn't been shielding me from the complexities of fund management. He had been shielding me from the reality. But what does this imply for the inheritance? Samantha's voice was sharp with panic. Michael was supposed to receive everything. Benjamin turned to a particular page in the testament, his finger following the text as he read. Article 9 is extremely clear. In the occurrence that the testator's commercial methods become the focus of federal examination, or if illegal accusations are submitted posthumously, the entirety of the estate will transfer to Grace Eleanor Preston with all other beneficiaries obtaining the sum of $1. The silence that followed was overwhelming. Michael stared at the paper like it was written in an unfamiliar language, his mouth opening and closing like a fish struggling for oxygen. $1, he whispered finally. $1, Benjamin confirmed. Your father was extremely specific about that quantity. I observed my son's face progress through disbelief, anger, and ultimately a cold calculation that reminded me uncomfortably of Richard in his most severe moments. This is absurd. Mother doesn't understand anything about operating a business empire. She'll misplace everything within a year. Actually, I stated quietly, speaking for the initial instance since we had entered the conference space, I understand more than you believe I do. Michael turned to me with the patronizing smile he had perfected over the years. Mother, no offense, but you've never labored a day in your existence. You wouldn't recognize a bond from a stock. That's when I decided to deliver my initial explosive revelation. Michael, who do you believe managed your father's private accounts for the previous 25 years? Who do you believe monitored his investments, his property levies, his philanthropic contributions? I reached into my purse and extracted a folder I had been carrying since my meeting with Benjamin. Who do you believe observed the inconsistencies in his commercial submissions that he claimed were accounting mistakes? The folder contained photocopies of documents I had discovered in Richard's home office over the years, papers that had consistently made me uneasy, but that I had filed away without questioning, bank statements with unusual deposits, transfer documents to foreign accounts, expense reports that didn't accumulate. I had maintained everything coordinated by date because that's the type of woman I was. I may have performed the elegant wife, but I wasn't sightless, I continued, distributing the papers across the table. I've known about Daniel Westwood for 4 years. I've known about the absent funds for even longer. I simply didn't understand what action to take about it. Benjamin was nodding approvingly. Grace, you've been retaining proof that the SEC would find highly valuable. Michael's face was quickly changing from pale to a concerning shade of crimson. You knew father was stealing and you didn't state anything. What was I supposed to state, Michael? That your adored father, the man you revered, was a lawbreaker. That everything we owned was constructed on falsehoods. I maintained my voice even, but internally I was trembling with a lifetime of suppressed fury. I attempted to converse with him about it once. He informed me I didn't comprehend commerce, that I should continue planning dinner events, and leave the significant choices to him. So you simply permitted him to continue doing it. I accomplished what I believed was optimal for our family. I remained silent and I recorded everything. Simply in case. I looked directly at my son, this man who had labeled me a burden merely a week earlier. It emerges simply in case is currently. Samantha ultimately located her voice. But what about us? What about our future? We have strategies, Michael. We were going to develop the enterprise, purchase the property in Martha's Vineyard. I sensed something cold and sharp settle in my chest. Their future, their strategies, as if I was already deceased and interred. Samantha, dear, I stated, my voice sweet as toxic syrup, I'm afraid your strategies will require adjustment because as of this afternoon, I am the exclusive heir to an estate valued at approximately $55 million. I paused, enjoying the moment. Well, presuming the SEC doesn't confiscate everything, naturally. Michael jumped to his feet, his chair scraping against the hardwood flooring. This is insane. You cannot operate an enterprise. You don't understand anything about shipping logistics or international commerce. I stood as well, and for the initial instance in 28 years, I felt taller than my son. You're completely correct, Michael. I don't understand how to operate an enterprise. I smiled and it felt like the initial genuine smile I had experienced since Richard's memorial. That's why I'm liquidating everything. True power emerges not from wealth but from moral clarity. The following morning, I awakened in my own bed for what I understood would be one of the final occasions. The SEC had completed their preliminary search, leaving the residence feeling breached, but somehow purer, as if Richard's confidential matters had been ventilated out along with his concealed documents. I prepared tea in the kitchen where Michael had so casually dismissed me, and I planned my new existence. My telephone had been ringing since 6:30 a.m., Michael, Samantha, various commercial associates who had learned about the SEC examination and journalists who somehow already knew about the inheritance controversy. I disregarded them all except for one communication. Grace, it's Daniel Westwood. The name still caused my stomach to tighten, but his voice sounded different than I had anticipated. Weary, possibly even regretful. I assume you're contacting to celebrate, I stated, settling into Richard's chair in his office. It felt altered now, less like his refuge and more like what it actually was, the control center for a criminal operation. Actually, I'm contacting to express regret. Daniel's laughter was bitter. I understand that appears ridiculous originating from me, but I wanted you to understand that I never intended for Richard to harm you. I was attempting to protect myself, and I didn't consider what it would cost his family. I was quiet for an extended moment, processing this unexpected humanization of the man I had viewed as my adversary for so long. Why are you informing me this? Because the SEC displayed me certain items during my interrogations. Financial records that demonstrate Richard was stealing long before I began working for him. He had been diverting funds from his investors for almost 25 years. Grace, I was merely the final individual to comprehend it. 25 years. Michael would have been 23 when Richard's illegal acts commenced, recently graduated and eager to join the family enterprise. Did he know? I inquired. Did my son understand what his father was doing? The pause on the telephone was response enough. I'm sorry, Grace. I truly am. After I disconnected, I sat in Richard's chair for a long duration. Staring at the empty filing cabinets the SEC had cleared out. My husband had been a thief. My son had known about it. And I, the supposedly naive wife, had been the only one actually attempting to maintain some appearance of honesty in our family. The irony was nearly humorous. By lunchtime, I had made a sequence of telephone calls that would alter everything. First to a real estate agent I had known from philanthropic work, an intelligent woman named Victoria who specialized in premium properties. Second to a wealth management firm in Boston that Richard had consistently dismissed as excessively conventional. Third to my sister Clara in Arizona. Clara, recall when you stated I should develop fortitude? Well, I believe I'm about to demonstrate that I possess one constructed of titanium. I cannot wait to hear this narrative personally. When are you arriving? Next week. I'm driving west with everything I own, which apparently is considerably more than I believed. Michael appeared at 2:30, appearing like he hadn't slept. Samantha wasn't with him, which informed me everything I needed to understand about how their marriage was managing this specific emergency. Mother, we need to converse. He followed me into the sitting area, his eyes scanning around the residence like he was observing it for the initial instance. I've been considering what you stated yesterday about liquidating everything. I've been considering it too. In fact, I've already commenced the procedure. The color vanished from his face. What do you imply commence the procedure? I imply I've registered the residence, contacted purchasers for the commercial resources, and coordinated to convert most of Richard's investment profile. I settled into my preferred chair, the one Richard had consistently stated was too costly for the sitting area. It emerges that when you're the exclusive heir to $55 million, individuals return your telephone communications extremely rapidly. Michael collapsed onto the sofa, his head in his hands. Mother, you don't comprehend the enterprise. It's not simply funds. It's father's heritage. It's everything he labored for. It's everything he stole for, I corrected gently. Michael, your father was a lawbreaker. His heritage is deception and securities violation. I'm not conserving that for anyone. But what about me? What about my future? For an instant, I observed him as he had been at 6 years old, weeping because another child had taken his bicycle. The impulse to comfort him, to resolve his issues, was as powerful as it had ever been. But then I recalled his phrases from the week before. The casual brutality in his voice when he had labeled me an elderly woman and instructed me to collect my bags. Michael, last week you made it extremely clear that I have no position in your future. You were prepared to exile me to assisted living without a second consideration, to market this residence and spend Richard's funds on your wife's designer accessories and holiday residences. I maintained my voice steady, but I could sense decades of suppressed injury rising to the surface. Now that the circumstance has altered, you desire to converse about your future. That was different. I believed father had left everything to me. I believed it was what he desired. And what did you believe I desired? Did you believe I desired to spend my remaining years playing chess with strangers while you resided in my residence and spent my husband's funds? Michael was quiet for an extended duration, staring at his hands. When he ultimately looked up, there was something in his eyes I hadn't observed since he was a child. Humiliation. I'm sorry, Mother. I was self-centered and I was cruel, and I've been taking you for granted for years. His voice fractured slightly. But please don't penalize me for Father's illegal acts. Don't ruin everything because you're furious with me. I examined my son's face, searching for sincerity beneath the desperation. Michael, I'm not ruining anything. I'm purifying the residence. There's a distinction. What does that imply? It implies I'm eliminating everything Richard constructed on falsehoods and commencing new with what remains. I leaned forward and for the initial instance in our discussion, I smiled. And if you're extremely fortunate, and if you can demonstrate to me that you're the man I raised you to be instead of the man your father educated you to become, you might have a position in that new beginning. For the initial instance since the examination of the testament, I observed hope glimmer in Michael's eyes. What would I have to accomplish? First, you're going to assist me market everything, and you're going to be truthful with each purchaser about precisely what they're obtaining. Second, you're going to cooperate completely with the SEC examination, even if it implies confessing what you understood, and when you understood it. I paused, allowing that to absorb. And third, you're going to apologize to each investor your father defrauded, even if it requires the remainder of your existence. Michael nodded slowly. And then? Then we'll observe if there's sufficient honest funds remaining to construct something new, something clean. I stood up, smoothing down my dress. But Michael, comprehend this. The ancient regulations are gone. I'm not your father's widow any longer. I'm not the woman who remains silent and writes checks and pretends not to notice when her family deceives her. I'm Grace Preston, and I'm $55 million wealthier and 40 years wiser. And I will never again permit anyone to treat me like I don't matter. My son looked at me like he was observing me for the initial instance in his existence. I comprehend. Excellent, because we commence tomorrow. 3 weeks later, I stood in the vacant sitting area of what had been my residence for 28 years, observing the movers load the final of my personal possessions into a vehicle destined for Arizona. The residence had sold in 8 days to a software innovator who had paid cash, and didn't care about its connection to Richard's illegal acts. Everything else was following suit with surprising velocity. Michael had been genuine to his word, laboring 16-hour days to assist liquidate the commercial resources and coordinate with the SEC examination. He had lost 12 pounds and gained a comprehension of precisely how profound his father's deceptions had extended. Each day delivered new disclosures. Foreign accounts Richard had concealed, investors he had cheated, workers whose retirement funds he had plundered. The Swiss account alone contained $4 million, Michael informed me over tea that morning, his voice hollow with fatigue. Funds he skimmed from the retirement program. These individuals trusted him with their retirement. Mother, certain of them labored for him for 35 years. I had observed my son struggle with the magnitude of his father's treachery. And for the initial instance in years, I was proud of him. The entitled man who had attempted to exile me to assisted living was gradually being substituted by someone who understood the weight of accountability. We'll correct it, I had informed him. Each cent we can recover returns to the individuals Richard stole from. Whatever remains after that, we'll determine what action to take with jointly. The SEC examination had uncovered $22 million in concealed resources. Funds that legally belonged to me under Article 9, but ethically belonged to Richard's victims. I had made the choice to return all of it. A selection that had surprised Agent Reynolds and shocked Michael. Mrs. Preston, you're under no legal requirement to return these funds, the agent had clarified. Your husband concealed these funds specifically to maintain them from his creditors and the IRS. Agent Reynolds. My husband was a thief. I don't desire funds he stole, even if I can legally retain them. I had signed the documents, transferring the concealed accounts back to the SEC for allocation to Richard's victims. Certain things are more significant than funds. Michael had observed me sign away $22 million without a word of objection. And I had observed something transition in his face. Respect, perhaps, or possibly just a delayed comprehension of who his mother actually was. Now, as I secured the main entrance of our New York residence for the ultimate occasion, Michael stood beside me with a single suitcase of his own. Are you certain about this? He inquired. Aunt Clara barely knows me. What if she doesn't desire both of us arriving? I smiled, considering my sister's reaction when I had contacted to alert her about Michael joining me. Clara stated, and I quote, It's about duration that boy discovered what his mother is constructed of. Bring him here, and I'll assist you transform him into a respectable human being. The journey to Arizona required 3 days. And somewhere around Colorado, Michael and I had the initial honest discussion we had experienced in 25 years. He informed me about the pressure Richard had placed on him to join the enterprise. The manner his father had progressively introduced him to the illegal elements of their functions, the guilt and fear he had existed with for years. I understood it was incorrect, Mother. I understood Father was stealing. But he made it appear like everyone accomplished it, like it was simply how commerce functioned. And by the duration I comprehended how severe it truly was. I was so immersed in it that I couldn't perceive an escape. I informed him about the isolation of my marriage, the manner Richard had progressively separated me from choice-making, the years I had spent feeling invisible in my own existence. I remained because I believed that's what excellent wives accomplished. I remained silent because I believed it was protecting our family. I was mistaken. When we entered Clara's driveway in Sedona, my sister was waiting on the veranda with a container of iced tea and a knowing smile. At 68, Clara possessed the identical silver hair as me, but twice the confidence. Achieved through a prosperous profession as a teacher and 2 marriages to men who had respected her strength instead of attempting to reduce it. Well, she stated as Michael and I exited the vehicle. Observe what the wind carried in. My younger sister and the son who believed he could place her in assisted living. Michael had the decency to flush. Aunt Clara, I owe you and Mother numerous apologies. Yes, you do. But apologies are simply phrases, boy. What matters is what you accomplish progressing forward. Clara embraced him regardless, then turned to me with tears in her eyes. Grace Eleanor, you appear like a woman who ultimately recalled she possesses a foundation. That night, sitting on Clara's covered patio and listening to the sound of the desert breeze, I sensed something I hadn't encountered in years. Peace. Not the tired silence of compliance, but the profound calm that originates from ultimately living your own existence. My telephone buzzed with a communication from Benjamin Cross. SEC has recovered another $3.1 million from Richard's Luxembourg account. Also, Victoria located purchasers for the final 4 properties. You're formally out of the shipping enterprise. I displayed the message to Michael, who was relaxed in a patio chair, appearing more at ease than I had observed him since childhood. What's the sum? He inquired. After returning everything to Richard's victims and covering the legal expenses, approximately $28 million. I positioned my telephone down and looked at my son. Seriously. Michael, I need you to comprehend something. Those funds aren't mine, and they're not yours. They're our opportunity to construct something honest, something we can be proud of. What did you have in mind? I had been considering this for weeks, ever since Agent Reynolds had displayed me the register of Richard's victims. Retirees who had mislaid their existence savings. Minor business proprietors who had been cheated from agreements. Workers whose retirement funds had been raided. Individuals whose existences had been demolished by my husband's greed. I desire to establish a foundation, I stated. Something that assists individuals reconstruct after they've been victims of investment deception. Legal support, guidance, emergency funds to assist them regain stability. Michael was quiet for an instant, then nodded slowly. Father would detest it. Yes, he would. That's how I understand it's the correct action to accomplish. Clara elevated her glass of iced tea in a salute. To Grace Eleanor Preston, who ultimately ceased permitting deceased men to create her choices. As we sat there in the Arizona warmth, I considered the woman I had been a month earlier, confused and grieving and prepared to accept whatever fragments of dignity my family was willing to provide me. That woman felt like a stranger currently, someone I might pity, but could no longer comprehend. The new Grace Preston possessed $28 million, a son who was learning to respect her, and a sister who had consistently believed she was stronger than she understood. More significantly, she possessed a purpose that had nothing to do with charity events or elegant widowhood. Tomorrow I would commence constructing something new, something clean, something that would assist individuals instead of stealing from them. Richard would have labeled it a misuse of funds, which was precisely why I understood it was going to be ideal. The ultimate inheritance is not money, but purpose. 6 months later, I stood in the conference room of what previously was Richard's downtown headquarters structure, currently renamed the Preston Foundation for Financial Healing, observing as our initial group of customers received checks that would assist them reconstruct their existences. Helen Mitchell, a 74-year-old woman who had mislaid her retirement funds to Richard's retirement program plan, wept as she thanked me for the fifth occasion. Mrs. Preston, I cannot believe this is actual. When that SEC agent contacted to inform me about the foundation, I believed it was another fraud. I handed her tissues from the container Michael had deliberately positioned on each table in the space. In 6 months, my son had transformed from a reluctant participant to the foundation's most devoted supporter, immersing himself in the work of repairing his father's destruction with the enthusiasm of a man pursuing redemption. Helen, this is simply the commencement, I informed her. We've also coordinated for you to meet with our legal squad about pursuing extra compensation through the Federal Victims Program. The transformation in Michael had been remarkable to observe. The entitled businessman who had attempted to exile me to assisted living had developed into someone I actually appreciated being near. He had shortened his hair, exchanged his costly suits for garments that didn't announce funds, and established a work ethic that would have impressed even Richard. More significantly, he had learned to listen. Mother, we need to converse about the Peterson situation, he stated later that afternoon as we examined files in what previously was Richard's private office. I had redecorated entirely, substituting Richard's intimidating oak furniture with comfortable seats, and walls covered with communications from individuals we had assisted. What about it? Robert Peterson mislaid his business because father defaulted on a commercial lease, correct? But I've been reviewing the documentation, and I believe father actually fulfilled that agreement and simply never informed Peterson. If I'm accurate, the business should have been leased for years. I looked up from the grant submission I was examining. 6 months earlier, Michael wouldn't have observed if one of Richard's victims was residing on the roadway. Currently he was remaining awake nights examining ancient contracts, searching for methods to correct his father's wrongs. How much investigative work did this require? Michael grinned, and I observed traces of the little boy he had been before Richard had shaped him into a miniature edition of himself. Approximately 14 hours and 4 containers of tea, but I located the fulfillment certificate buried in father's documents. Peterson's business was finalized in 2019, but father maintained the documentation and evicted him regardless. So Richard stole a man's business even though it was already leased. Essentially. But here's the favorable information. Peterson's still alive, still leasing office space throughout the city. And the current proprietors of his business are willing to lease it back to him for what they compensated at the eviction auction. I sensed that familiar combination of rage and satisfaction that arrived with each new revelation about Richard's illegal acts. Rage at the scope of his brutality, satisfaction at our capability to correct it. Coordinate the conference. And Michael. Yes. Your father would be humiliated of you currently. Michael's grin expanded. Thanks, Mother. That's the kindest statement you've expressed to me all week. My telephone rang, interrupting our moment. Samantha's name materialized on the screen. The initial occasion she had contacted since the separation documents had been finalized 4 months earlier. Grace, it's Samantha. I was questioning if we could converse. I had anticipated this communication ultimately. Samantha had contested the separation initially, claiming Michael was experiencing some type of collapse, and that she could assist him through it. But confronted with a husband who had chosen honesty over prosperity, and a foundation that demanded extended hours for no income, she had decided to minimize her damages. What can I accomplish for you, Samantha? I desired to apologize for the manner I managed you. The assisted living matter, pressuring Michael to remove you from the residence. I was avaricious and I was mistaken. I observed Michael through the glass wall of my office as he conversed animatedly on the telephone, with what appeared like favorable information for one of our customers. What's truly occurring, Samantha? There was an extended pause. I'm dating someone new, William Westwood. He's in commercial development. And when I informed him about Michael's family circumstance, he inquired me certain questions that made me recognize, well, that I might have been on the incorrect side of matters. William Westwood, Daniel Westwood's younger cousin, if I recalled accurately. The irony was nearly too ideal. Samantha, I value the apology, but I believe it's somewhat delayed for that. Don't you? I understand. I understand it is. But Grace, I desired you to understand that what you and Michael are accomplishing with the foundation, it's incredible. William displayed me certain articles about your work, and I recognized that the man I married would never have been capable of what Michael's accomplishing currently. She was accurate about that. The Michael who had attempted to institutionalize me 6 months earlier would never have spent his Saturday afternoon assisting a 72-year-old man reclaim the business Richard had stolen from him. Michael's become the man I consistently hoped he could be, I stated. It simply required mislaying everything for him to locate it. And you? How are you managing with all this? I looked around my office with its comfortable furniture, and walls filled with thank you communications from individuals whose existences we had assisted reconstruct. Through the window, I could observe the desert landscape where I currently resided in a modest villa that was entirely mine. No husband's heritage to maintain. No son's anticipations to meet. No one's endorsement to seek but my own. Samantha, I'm 73 years old. I operate a foundation that distributes millions of dollars. My son actually respects me for the initial instance in decades. And I proceed to bed each night understanding that I spent the day improving the world somewhat better than I discovered it. I paused, considering the woman I had been when Samantha initially suggested placing me in assisted living. I've never been more content in my existence. After I disconnected, Michael knocked on my office entrance. Favorable information or unfavorable information first? Consistently favorable information first. Robert Peterson's obtaining his business back. The current proprietors just consented to lease, and we're covering the complete lease cost plus relocation costs. Michael's face was practically glowing with satisfaction. He wept on the telephone. Mother, a 72-year-old man, wept because he regains his enterprise. And the unfavorable information. Channel 12 desires to produce a feature narrative about the foundation. They're labeling it the widow's retaliation. How one woman transformed her husband's illegal acts into justice. Michael rotated his eyes. I informed them you don't conduct interviews, but they're quite persistent. I considered that for an instant. 6 months earlier, the concept of public consideration would have terrified me. But the woman who had been afraid of Richard's disapproval was gone, substituted by someone who understood that her narrative might motivate other individuals to locate their own strength. Coordinate it, I stated. But I desire Robert Peterson there to share his narrative. This isn't about my retaliation. It's about his recuperation. Michael nodded, then hesitated at the entrance. Mother, I understand I've expressed this previously, but I desire to state it again. I'm sorry for the manner I managed you after Father died. I'm sorry it required all this to make me recognize what type of woman raised me. Michael, you don't require to continue apologizing. You've spent 6 months demonstrating that you're sorry through your actions. I understand. But I desire to ensure you understand that even if we had never located Article 9, even if the SEC had never examined Father, even if everything had proceeded the manner I planned it, he paused, searching for the correct phrases, I would have spent the remainder of my existence regretting how I managed you that week. I stood up and embraced my son, this man who had ultimately learned to value character over currency. The favorable information is we'll never have to discover. As Michael departed to contact the television channel, I turned back to my window overlooking the canyon. Somewhere out there, Richard's other victims were gradually reconstructing their existences, utilizing funds that had once been concealed in foreign accounts to cover food and medical expenses, and aspirations they had believed were mislaid permanently. Richard had spent 25 years stealing from individuals who trusted him. With any fortune, I'd spend the next 25 years returning it all. The ancient Grace would have labeled that justice. The new Grace labeled it a fairly favorable commencement. If this story connected with you, please like this video and follow Winds of Thought for additional narratives of resilience. Your encouragement assists us share these significant communications.